Companies who want to diversify their workforce, well, there's nothing wrong with that, at least not inherently. Of course, sometimes those hiring practices take a few steps too far and become themselves discriminatory. Harvard University found this out last year in a landmark Supreme Court decision that said, no, you cannot use race and gender as the preeminent points for admissions or scholarships, let's say. But when it comes to corporate America, this has made it down the works through hiring practices, and this now may come under scrutiny itself, and it looks like the Walt Disney Company may be the first for the hammer to drop. Joining us today from this clip from the recent Sunday Live show is the great Ron Coleman, the Coleman Nation podcast, one of our legal experts here to share his thoughts as we cover this. And earlier this week, we had Christopher Rufo, who put out a couple of videos that he found that was sent to him by a source, saying, "Hey, look, here's a bit of an interview between the two Bobs when they were sharing custody of the CEO position at Disney in 2021." And one of the things that struck me in the interview, well, I'll play a few clips from this, and who knows? Maybe this will be considered reused content.
You never know. You never know.
So let's bring this up first. This is Bob Chapek being asked a question about, Disney and their philanthropy when it comes to some of these types of things.
We all know money talks, and so many companies put funds towards social justice efforts after George Floyd's murder. And we all know the impact that COVID has had on Disney's businesses. And yet, I'm wondering what your thinking is in our overall commitment and investment in the social justice space in terms of philanthropy.
Sure. I really think of it, I guess, in two different ways. Number one is the financial commitment that you referenced, Juju. And we're addressing that in a number of different ways. By the end of this year, at least 50% of our charitable giving will be directed to underrepresented communities, including a new program that invests in underserved youth and hopefully helps create a new generation of diverse storytellers and innovators. Also, I just recently approved a plan to ensure that we reach at least $1 billion in annual spend with diverse suppliers, which nearly doubles our current investment with the diverse community. And while I think those types of things are really important, I firmly believe that the multiplier effect, the leverage, if you will, that we can have with our content far outreaches and will outlast any check that we can write of any amount. We have more info.
Okay, so just to kind of, that's the bulk of it right there. So we're gonna spend a lot of money to buy some goodwill. In the social sphere and in the media, but by golly, we can help a lot more with just creating content.
So there's something there that's really interesting too that needs to be brought forth, and that is that what Bob Chapek. Well, there's two things. First thing is, let's say this, because there is some criticism that we have defended Bob Chapek on this, and now with the leaked video, we were wrong. But that's not actually the case. We're not above being wrong. But in this case, Bob Chapek later on after this video, you got to remember that Bob Iger's still in power.
Exactly.
Bob Iger's still in power when this video is recorded, and that's the other leaked video from Bob Iger. He's still there, and he's still the acting CEO, even if the CEO and title is given to Chapek. But Chapek attempts to moderate the company after Iger actually does, quote unquote, leave. I know he was still on as a consultant. But Chapek does attempt to moderate the company. The second thing that's really fascinating here is that from Chapek's point of view, he's not willing to give any additional monies to this. So folks, pay attention to that. No additional monies. What Chapek is talking about is changing the distribution ratio for the charitable giving. In other words, if you are a poor, pale-skinned kid in Eastern Kentucky or West Virginia, or if you are a poor person living out in the deserts of New Mexico and you do not fit the DEI Dippin' Dots, you don't get that money because Those charities are being switched over to the charities of underrepresented groups, but the total cash flow into those charities does not change. And so Chapek was making this offer of, we'll redistribute this in a new way that's based on race, essentially. We're not going to increase our charitable giving. And at the same time, we're going to be virtuous in our content creation. Iger flips that on its head when Iger gets back in control, really, because Iger empowers the Reimagine Tomorrow party, which is to say that, no, we're not just going to do this through our content creation. It's going to be the people who create the content who we're going to completely revolutionize and switch out. That's the difference.
Yes. And you know what's funny is that we'll play a bit of this one as well. And we're going to talk more about this once we get to this complaint here, to what you said about how Iger was still there. Well, that was one of the first things that jumped out at me because of a comment that Iger makes in this.
Well, I mean, Bob has talked about this eloquently since he's become CEO. I'll say a couple of things about it. You know, we've tended to shy away from politics. And in doing so, I think we've shied away from talking about issues that aren't political at all, like the issues that we're talking about today. Because we believe in doing so, maybe it looks like we're taking a stand. Well, in that reality, we should be taking a stand. By the way, I take responsibility for this. I was CEO for 15 years. And so I manage the company's public-facing processes and how we were portraying ourselves. And I think that we have to be less cautious, as Bob, I think, was just alluding to, about such things and not be concerned, like just commenting about what happened in Washington last week. That's not political on our part at all. We know that what we saw was fundamentally wrong and that it was rooted in hatred and disrespect and contempt and intolerance. And we should feel free as a company to comment about that without retribution. And another thing I want to say that I've learned these last 9 to 12 months is, I'm very proud of a lot of the work we've done in terms of diversity and inclusion on screen. When we did Coco, for instance, at Pixar, a great example of that, or Tiana, or of course, Black Panther is one of the great examples of that. I allowed those things to make me feel a bit complacent in a sense. It's not that I wanted to be that way, but I thought, wow, we did Black Panther. How great are we? And it caused me to not focus as much as I should have on the culture of the company and the environment and in the voices that were telling those stories as opposed to just how they were being portrayed on the screen.
So there you go. He's talking about how proud of himself he was for Black Panther, but then he realized that, wow, instead of just making content, we need to put in, effectively what he's saying is we need to put in the hiring practices that will also specifically discriminate based on race and ethnicity to hire certain people to fill these roles. Now, on one side of the coin, you could say, wow, that sounds so wonderfully virtuous. While on the other side of the coin, it looks like a civil rights violation. So, but the first thing that Iger said there is what should jump out at you. Bob's done a great job or whatever, talking about Chapek and all this. It's exactly what you just said, Pro. It's all about the fact that at the time, Chapek was towing the line that Bob Iger forced him to tow. And let's not forget the article that we covered several months ago from Alex Sherman at CNBC talking about all of the strife between Iger and Chapek during that very year. Maybe shortly after that interview is when it began, where Chapek didn't want to keep going in the same direction that Iger was and was trying to push back. And then once the whole issue started with the Florida business and House Bill 1557, the Parental Rights and Education Bill, and Chapek's first response was, we didn't think we needed to get involved in that. It sounded very different than what Bob Iger wanted to do. So, yeah, at first glance, it seems like Chapek was right in there with him, but there's still a lot out there that seems to suggest to me that Chapek was just playing ball at the time because I don't think he had much of any other choice. Bob Iger was still the executive chairman. He was co-CEO, chairman of the Disney board. He still held all the power. until he retired, quote unquote, at the end of 2021, which was well after this interview. He still held the cards. So I don't know, Ron. What do you think about all that?
I think it's mostly from a legal point of view, irrelevant. It doesn't really matter who the CEO was, how many showers he took and where he took them. The question, and also, I mean, the far more interesting, like, companies can donate to whatever charities they want to donate to. I mean, that's
Sure.
an old debate in the philosophy of corporations. Should corporations, be giving money to charities at all? Is that how you maximize shareholder value? And the consensus is, yeah, that's within the realm of what management can decide.
Sure.
And it's a good way to buy goodwill, et cetera, et cetera. And if you want to buy goodwill on the DEI axis, then there are organizations that you give to. It's the employment stuff, as well as the promotions and the special programs that were probably largely illegal, or at least skirting the line until 2023, but that, following the big ruling by the Supreme Court, are a lot more illegal and a lot more clearly illegal, and that they are obviously not backing down on, along with a lot of other organizations and a lot of other companies. But Disney, whether it's an affirmative decision that they're making, a tactical decision that they're making because of other litigation that's going on, or whether it's to reiterate stuff we've been saying for a long time, simply the culture of that company, which is utterly unable to get out of its own way on these issues, they're going to have to follow the law. And it's probably going to tell in the very near future.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I don't see anything necessarily, nefarious about the decisions to who you donate money to and all this kind of stuff. But I read that whole thing that Rufo put out, those videos, as kind of a precursor to, like you said, what really got into the problematic areas of the hiring practices. So it went from let's financially support to then let's make content to then let's start actually hiring people based on all this kind of criteria. And I think the
thing is, Valley, this is so comprehensive across elite American institutions, for-profit, nonprofit, all the universities. It's pretty well established that there are no opportunities in academia for white males, certainly if they're heterosexual. That's just not going to change overnight. And what is interesting, though, is that, for example, the academic world has been very quick to work with their legal departments and their outside counsel to find ways to make the discrimination hidden, to hide it, to use code words, to do the kind of stuff that was always understood to be unlawful when it was done to benefit white people and males. Now it's being used to benefit others. That's an interesting, world of litigation that's going to keep folks like me busy for a while. But corporations like Disney, and it would be interesting to compare the stuff that is checked off in this America First complaint to the EOC. I compare it to other entertainment companies and see whether or not Disney's being picked on unlawfully here. I mean, unduly here, or whether it's perhaps the worst actor. I just don't. I don't know that. And not that would be a defense, but it's it's something that I think we want to have a better understanding of.
So let me point to something real quick, Valiant, that I think this is tremendously. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. So let me give you these statistics. because this comes from the same time frame that we're talking about with Disney in these leaked videos.
Yep, right here.
This is according to Bloomberg. You have that pulled up? Yes. Okay. So from Bloomberg, of the more than 323,000 jobs added to the U.S. workforce by major companies in 2021, 94% went to people of color, according to Bloomberg. If you go down just a little bit lower, of the 88 companies, which employ a combined 9 million people, 74 saw an increase in the numbers of workers from 2020 to 21. It's that next paragraph that's so impressive as well. White workers accounted for 20,000 plus jobs, or just 6%, while people of color accounted for 300,000 jobs. What's fascinating to me about that is in the sort of in the shadow of what was going on in that year, those are unsustainable numbers. There's simply not enough people who are not of European descent to satisfy that kind of hiring frenzy. And it also, there's no possible way. And I'm not against hiring people of various ethnicities. I think it's a great idea that your company should, have people of all kinds of backgrounds, because then they'll argue with one another. And I think that's positive because it helps you know when you're wrong. But the issue here is it looks like these companies have been hiring individuals based on race, but also based on their political thoughts and affiliations, i.e. what we've seen with Disney, allegedly monitoring the social media accounts and calling in anyone with a middle ground to conservative viewpoint into HR. This is what is wiping out the meritocracy of America, and it's what's damaging, I suppose, also the freedom of speech aspect, because when you flood these companies that are highly influential with a ton of individuals that doesn't seem to be pragmatically capable of being based on meritocracy, then you're going to insert a ton of people into these roles that they're not interested in the battle of ideas. They're interested in power plays because that's what got them there in the first place.
Yes. And again, especially at a time, think of 2021 when we were coming out of lockdowns, right? The unemployment rate was fairly high at that moment. And again, you're going into a hiring frenzy to basically where you had a non-voluntary attrition of workers through 2020 because of that then as things got back to normal had to be replaced. And the hiring practices at that point shifted into apparently one of a more, according to this report from Bloomberg, what they suggest is a more devout, racially biased set of factors here. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.